This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. We start this week with a question. Is Jeremy Hardy a closet Tory?
The point about Osborne and Cameron is they're a horrible kind of posh, braying hoorays, having a tremendous lark, playing at running a country. And if anything gets in their way, it's as though it's the first day of the grouse season and one of the beaters has been shot and his widow's kicking up a bit of a bloody stink about it.
This is James. I think anyone would be hard-pushed to call the 30 minutes of incessant Tory coalition-bashing comedy. Just broadcasting such a left-wing biased show in prime-time comedy slot is, I'm afraid, fuel to all those who accuse the BBC of such bias.
In feedback this week, listeners ask why most BBC comedy seems to be left-wing. Is Boris Johnson the only right-winger who can tell a joke? Or is it just that he is one? Sorry, that's just my socialist side showing. BBC presenters are, of course, supposed to be neutral, but sometimes we let down our guard and our personality shines through. I've never done it myself, of course, but Paddy O'Connell has.
My name's Lynn Smith, and my main concern was that he wasn't going to get into trouble. I had feelings of thinking, gosh, I hope he doesn't get hauled over the coals and told to be a bit more professional, because I felt it was just so human.
And remember all the BBC talk earlier this year about getting more female experts onto the airwaves? Has anything changed? In honour of International Women's Day this week, we follow academic researcher Sally Marlowe as she makes her first news feature for the Today programme.
It's 20 to 3 and we've just finished for the night. The whole day has been quite a baptism of fire.
Plus, can you identify this sound? It helps to be a Northumbrian. The answer coming up shortly. By the way, if you notice that my interviewing technique has changed, this is the reason. Earlier this week, Radio 1 reporter Chris Stark of The Scott Mills Show interviewed the Hollywood star Mila Kunis. He declared at the start that he was terrified, asked all the wrong questions in the wrong order, and in doing so created an internet sensation. And an interview which Mila Kunis herself declared, perhaps tongue-in-cheek, to be one of the best she's ever done.
Am I doing all right so far?
You're doing fantastic.
Okay.
How you feeling? How you feel you're doing?
I'm a little less nervous than when I walked in.
Right? It's not that bad. It's not that scary.
I don't know.
Really? What about this is frightening to you? Tell me.
Well, I'm talking right at you now. There's, cameras everywhere. There's a lot of people.
Ms. Kunis also agreed to go to a football match with him, and it's not even a Premier League game.
Yeah, we go see a Watford match. It's a nice day out. We could go for a Nando's before. Do you have Nando's?
What are Nando's?
It's like a chicken restaurant.
Gosh, you're teaching me so much.
I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here at all. And
this is the best interview I've had today. I'm begging you. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
right, here's how I see the day panning out.
I think I'll try that interview technique with the next film star I get to meet. Julie Christie, perhaps, or better still, Helen Mirren. They'd just laugh, I guess, which is what many listeners do when Jeremy Hardy is on the wireless.
Jeremy Hardy speaks to the nation.
First-time listener Deborah Wilson was hooked.
I thought the programme was brilliant. How long must it take him to write such clever stuff, peppered with such golden nuggets of wit? I loved it.
I suppose it's like plantation owners going out onto the veranda to listen to the slaves sing.
These lefties sure have rhythm. Weller! Weller! Come here, pour me my mint julep.
But many of you felt that while Jeremy might have thought he was speaking to the nation, he was really only speaking to Labour voters.
Hello, this is Ian Payne from Maidenhead. This programme appeared to be a diatribe of Jeremy Hardy's prejudiced extreme left-wing views. It wasn't clever and it certainly wasn't funny.
Conservatives love a row with Brussels because upsetting foreigners is second only to killing them and stimulating the pleasure centres of the Conservative Party.
The BBC is a non-political organisation and yes, it is paying for and broadcasting what appeared to be a party political broadcast for the Communist Party.
Hi, my name's Jack Brooks from Wokingham in Berkshire. I wouldn't normally phone in to complain about a programme, but I'm quite young and trendy, so I only thought old retired generals do that. But Jeremy Hardy had me screaming at the radio, I'm afraid to say. Next time, for a bit of balance, could we maybe have a right-wing comedian, if you can find one?
Caroline Raphael is the commissioning editor for Radio 4 Comedy. Can she find right-wing comics? Does she want to? And what does she make of our listeners' views that Jeremy Hardy's programme is something of a soapbox for his political views?
I think it reflects some of his political views. He takes a lot of swipes at a lot of targets, including actually himself. He actually calls himself, I think, a lower middle class lefty. I think that the target of satirists will always be those in power.
Well, there are a lot of people who laugh who like Jeremy Hardy, but they are troubled by what they see as rather too many left-wing comedians and rather too few right ones.
It's very difficult to find comedians from the right. I'm not saying they aren't out there. Producers, both in-house and the independents, spend a lot of time in the comedy clubs looking for people with a range of views. And I do remember putting a call out on this very programme a few years ago saying, very open to names. If somebody says, please, would you go and see, we will go and see. But we're not seeing them come through. There isn't a tradition in terms of stand-up. Possibly the right feels more comfortable with a pen and paper and the left standing up on a soapbox or in a comedy club. I genuinely don't know. I'm sure there's a PhD thesis in that. I don't know, but it is something, I do admit it's something we struggle with.
But you could ask people on the News Quiz, and Jeremy Hardy, for example, to take note of the Now Show, which seems to be able to be satirical about everything.
I think the thing about the Now Show is it is a different structure and format. The News Quiz is very much the chair asking people for their personal views. The Now Show is very scripted, and very much they are presenting a view almost as a performer, almost as an actor with a script, albeit their script, rather than a very personal, of-the-moment response.
You've talked about the difficulty of finding right-wing comedians, but the BBC has decided that in areas of coverage of science and engineering and elsewhere where they can't get enough women involved, that they will go out of their way to run days for them, try to help them. Do you think you should do the same with right-wingers, with some of the best writers, say, in Fleet Street and elsewhere, and say, come along, let's talk about how we can make what you write work for us and enable you to perform that?
Well, if you look at the News Quiz, for example, the range of journalists and the range of comedians they've had on, certainly over the last series, is much broader. They are trying people out. But these are incredibly exposed slots with an enormous audience. The only way of doing it, to a certain extent, is doing it. You can practice, but having a live audience in front of you, knowing the tape is rolling, is quite different. But I think the producers are working hard at extending the range of people.
But people have noticed on the News Quiz that there are more women appearing, so you've obviously deliberately tried to move away, or start to move away, from all male panels. There's no reason, if you can do it in that sense, you shouldn't do it in a political sense. Is there over a period?
Assuming you do know what somebody's political opinion is, there are a range of stand-ups, a lot of probably slightly more observational stand-ups. There aren't that number of political stand-ups. In a way, stand-up comedy has moved away from that to become more observational. And also people's opinions change. People's views when it comes to something like education and health may be different from their views about defence policy. I think we have to be really careful about not jumping to conclusions.
Returning to Jeremy Hardy Speaks to the Nation, which is a different sort of comedy. It is, to a degree, largely polemical. Do you need to balance it? And if you can't, should you not do it?
No, I disagree with that point of view completely. I think the BBC has a responsibility, and indeed it's there as part of our guidelines on impartiality, which is different from absolutely balancing everything. But you cannot say to somebody, we're not going to broadcast that because we cannot find your opposite. I think the BBC's responsibility towards creative people, towards dramatists, comedians, writers, is slightly different from its responsibility to take a breadth of political views. It's absolutely got to be funny, it's got to be clever, it's got to be thoughtful, and I don't think we would broadcast anybody who actually just had one note. And I would argue that the notes in Jeremy Hardy are actually subtly quite different, and that there are very clever views about Ed Miliband and about the Lib Dems as well as about the Conservatives.
Caroline Raphael, commissioning editor for Radio 4 Comedy. And what did you think of that interview, Mila Kunis?
You're doing fantastic.
Thanks, Mila. Could you just have a word with Julie and Helen? And if they're not in, please try Vanessa. And if she needs to know how to reach me, it's at Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX. Or she could leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. please tell her that standard landline charges apply, but it could cost her more on some mobile networks. Or she can tweet me at BBC R4 Feedback or email feedback@bbc.co.uk.
When I left Bodywood, I thought I heard you call.
The best interviewers are, of course, often the best listeners, those who know when to stay silent. And when you're listening to a really good radio drama, all you want to do is close your eyes and enter into that imaginary world, until you're jolted back to the real one by what seems like some glaring error.
My name's Jen Larkin and I live in Northumberland. The Song Thief was a beautiful play about Northumbrian songs. And at the heart of the play was a song written by a troubled, very sad character who'd been inspired by the haunting, spine-tingling call of the curlew.
The curlew sings its song, it tells me of our love.
However, the sound effect that was used throughout the play was a two-tone call, which I actually thought was a lapwing. It certainly wasn't the long burbling call that you get of a curlew in flight.
What's that lovely noise?
Curlew. What weasel we call it.
I'm actually housebound down in a valley in Northumberland, but I always have the windows open, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to hear the distant sound of a curlew burbling on the air, and I have to stop breathing to listen. It is magical.
We asked Michael Chaplin, the writer of The Song Thief and a keen birdwatcher himself, to clear up once and for all whether it was a curlew or a lapwing.
I can categorically state that the call was that of a curlew, not a lapwing, or peewit, as we call it in the North Country. But I understand where the question came from, because the call that's most associated with the curlew is a rather long, downward, falling, trilling. And we did have the longer trilling in mind when we wrote and recorded the song, but it is quite long. But in fact, the curlew has another call, and we thought that the shorter call worked as well in emphasising the play's themes of loss and melancholy.
My curlew. Look at you, Mary, like a dream walking in the room.
So the writer of that drama got his details right. But another listener, Roma Felstein, is sure that attention to detail really did slip in a recent afternoon drama about police corruption.
I run a London first aid company, and I was listening in the office to Noble Cause Corruption, the afternoon play.
Mike Bravo, this is Sierra 45. Go ahead, over.
Ambulance required at flat 5, 27 Milton Street. Officer down, officer down.
I thought the play was great, but what concerned me was that the police officer who ran to help her colleague was doing CPR, and she kept saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5, 6, 7. Breathe.
Mike Bravo, this is Sierra 45.
Best practice is always start with the chest compressions for an adult, and it is always 30 chest compressions and then 2 breaths. And I think it's really, really important that listeners know what best practice is. Maybe you didn't have the time to do this, but I think you could have faded in and out. When we do our training, if there isn't time to keep going over and over, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and I think that gets the point across.
So why didn't the drama do that? We asked its producer, Boz Temple Morris, to explain.
We did 7 compressions because this was a very dramatic moment. To take the time for 30 would have taken the audience outside of that moment. Your listener makes a really good suggestion to cut away from the scene and come back in. The reason we didn't do that was in order not to take the audience away from the experience that the officer is having.
What were you thinking, Dan? What were you thinking? Breathe, goddammit! Breathe!
This play does have an exhaustive attention to detail because it deals with issues that are very controversial about police corruption, about police process, about legal process. So we did pay particular attention to make sure that these were authentically rendered. So there's a lot of decisions that are made to maintain the authenticity in the drama. But sometimes you can't be exhaustively detailed in terms of public information. And I do think that audiences understand that.
Our thanks to Boz Temple-Morris, who talked to us from his office in South London, right next to the M25, it sounded like.
I had a great interview.
I hope he enjoyed it too. By the way, Mila, if Julie, Helen and Vanessa won't do it, please try Delia. If she would agree to an interview, it might go down well with listener Jane Priest.
I just wanted to say how great it's been to hear so many more female voices on Radio 4 in the last couple of weeks. It seems as though certain programmes, especially the Today programme, have taken on board recent criticism regarding most of their guest experts and contributors tending to be men.
Well, Jane, perhaps one reason could be the effects of the BBC Academy's Expert Women's Training Day, the first results of a new initiative to get more female voices on air. Feedback reported from this event in January when 30 women, experts in the notoriously underrepresented fields of science, technology, business and engineering, all received a day's hands-on media training in TV and radio. One of them was Sally Marlowe, an academic researcher from King's College London, whose specialism is alcohol addiction in women. And last Friday, she presented her first ever report for the Today programme.
81.
Darts thunk into the board at the Castle and Anchor on Stockton-on-Tees High Street. The football's on and people are settled in for the night. This is a pub I visited many times as a young woman growing up in the North East, and now I'm back to explore the science of why people drink.
But what was it like making the report, and how helpful was the training day? We asked Sally to keep an audio diary of her experience.
I think the BBC Academy Day was really interesting.
It is fantastic to have so many incredibly talented and experienced specialists in the room today.
There was a networking lunch, and I had beforehand marked up my list to say who I wanted to speak to, and on that list was Kerry Thomas, the editor of the Today programme. So I said to him, "Oh, hello, you're on my list. This is who I am. This is what I do." That evening I got back and Kerry had sent me an email saying, "I'm going to put someone in touch with you and let's see if we can get you on."
I'm Tom Coles, a radio producer at the Today programme, and I was the producer for Sally's package. The start of the process was really just to channel down expertise into a narrative that could work in a concise form, so take the kind of exceptionally broad knowledge base that Sally has and funnel it into something that could work in 5 minutes.
So it's Wednesday night, the night before I'm going up to the North East to do the recording for the Today programme. Usually I do this type of work in the context of an academic researcher, so it'll be interesting to see what the difference is, not only in terms of the information I can get, but in terms of how people react to me. So that's it for tonight, and looking forward to tomorrow and getting on that train and going up to the north. The brightly lit wards of the admissions unit at University Hospital of North Tees is where people end up when their drinking has got so out of control that they can no longer function. And liver failure is a real possibility. I'm sitting in the car park outside the hospital, having just done our first batch of interviews. We interviewed a really lovely lady who is in the very early stages of trying to get a grip of her alcohol problems. Can you describe how you feel at the moment?
Ashamed, I think, is the biggest word I could use. Really, really ashamed. I've let a lot of people down.
And what's next for you?
I was very aware of the fact that we were putting Sally in situations which could be potentially fairly difficult, but also the level of knowledge that Sally was able to put into the interviews was totally different from working with a reporter who'd be coming at from my kind of perspective of thinking about things automatically from a journalistic point of view. Having that kind of in-depth knowledge gets into the detail of a lot of the people that we spoke to's lives in a way that was just fascinating to listen to.
Do you have any idea why for you drink has been such a problem?
Basically because I was sexually abused as a child and, sorry I'm getting upset, my father was an alcoholic and I thought, oh well, it's normal.
I don't know whether there's a connection between the number of women on air and how alcohol and women is reported. What I do know about the way alcohol and women is reported is it's kept very hidden, and that's because women don't want to talk about it. But women don't want to talk about it because society stigmatises them for it. So you've got a chicken and egg situation, because part of the stigma is de facto driven by the media and the media's reporting. I find this a really difficult debate, because there's a bit of me that says the best person to do the job is the best person to do the job. But these problems which are actually about women and how society sees women, I think benefit hugely from a female perspective.
As the evening wears on, at a student pub on the outskirts of Middlesbrough, the blood alcohol content levels are rising and the inhibitions are falling.
I lose things. She does. I lose my shoe, I've lost my phone, I've lost my dignity.
It's 20 to 3 and we've just finished for the night. The whole day has been quite a baptism of fire. The immediacy of putting together a package for radio, having to think on my feet. Sometimes intuition is your strongest weapon. So thanks to the Today programme for having the faith in me to let me do this.
Alcohol is implicated in 47% of violent crime in the UK, and it's reckoned to cost the economy £21 billion a year. We asked Sally Marlowe, who's a researcher in alcohol addiction at King's College London, to look at the challenge of tackling alcohol abuse and how it can best be understood.
I loved the piece. I loved doing it, but also I was able to hit the ground running because I'd had the Expert Women's Day. In terms of the practical skills and the understanding of how broadcasting works, I would like to do more of this. I think there are other pieces we could have made about alcohol. Maybe we'll get to make those in the future.
Our thanks to Sally Marlowe and to her producer Tom Coles. Now, in recent weeks on Feedback, we've been discussing the use of strong language on the radio, in particular the use of the N-word in a Radio 4 news report. Listener Andy Baker has been in touch to applaud the decision to include the word. Thanks for some common sense, he says. Tell us the facts and we can decide. But Michael Virtue suggests that radio should have a watershed similar to that of television. I've lost count of the number of times I've turned off the radio due to unacceptable language. We also had a call from listener Esther Slattery from Chingford.
I feel devastated as a black woman, as a mother who've experienced racism from strangers time and time again, people stopping when I'm with my children and shouting the word. Every time I hear that word, whether it's in passing, it brings back all those memories. So if you can stop and imagine what it's like to have to explain to your children why the stranger has wound down their window and shouted that word, you can possibly understand how devastating it is when you're listening to your favorite radio and then it flows through the airwaves. There's no excuse for it, no reason for it. It's continuing abuse, is being a tool of racists. Thank you.
Our thanks to Esther and to all of you who have contacted us with your views on this complex topic. And now, in a week when listeners have demonstrated their attention to detail, and an interviewer caught the imagination of the public with an unusual and disarming take on interviewing, two of our most respected broadcasters have revealed a little of their private selves and been praised by listeners for doing so.
I think I'll type out what you wrote. Not to pry, mothers shouldn't ever pry. I suppose all I want to know is what you saw. What were you looking for?
In an unusual afternoon drama on Wednesday, listeners were given a window into the soul of midweek's Livy Purvis in The Silence at the Song's End. After the suicide of her 23-year-old son, Nicholas Heine, following a serious mental illness, Livy discovered his notes, poems and journals and set about transcribing them. The result was a book of his work, which was specially adapted for Radio 4. Many of you wrote to us to express your admiration for the piece.
The morning runs on, a springtime secret, through the avenues and avenues which lure all sound away.
I'm Monica and I live in South London. I was going to go out but I was absolutely pulled in. An amazing, wonderful play, and I just want to thank Libby Purvis so much for having the courage to go through her son's papers and turn them into such a marvellous experience.
I'm Kate Persclave, and I thought that the silence at the song's end was brilliant, heartbreaking and heartwarming. Many thanks to Libby Purvis for sharing this treasure and letting us see the development of a poet. This will become a classic.
We must accept the shadows. I fully accept that I am the battlefield for heaven and hell more than most. I seek not for resolution, since I am the resolution. I have become the human battlefield for good and evil.
We also heard from many of you who were extremely moved by a love letter in last Sunday's Broadcasting House, presented by Paddy O'Connell. The poem was written by Emily Blacher to her partner Remy Oshlik, a young photographer who died a year ago taking photographs in Syria. She read the poem aloud for BH.
Oshlik, I've never found it so difficult to write. My dictionary are useless. So instead, I made a list of everything I loved about you.
Hello, my name is Pearl Matheson from Dunstable in Bedfordshire. I'm just phoning with a message for Paddy O'Connell to say that many listeners would have shared in your compassion so strikingly aired by silence following the reading of Emily Blacher's love letter.
I'm Peter Frost from the Ipswich area. I was moved, as were many people, I'm certain. I think it illustrates the value of live broadcasting and also the way that Paddy O'Connell is such a human presenter.
Hi, I'm Judith from Surrey. It stopped me in my tracks and my tears were flowing long before Paddy O'Connell's emotional voice closed the programme. This was radio at its very best. Thank you.
You would hate to see me give up. So I'm drying my tears and watching your favourite movies on repeat. The one that's made you happy, like singing in the rain. And I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, and I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark. Up above, the sun is in my heart, and I'm ready for love. My angel, take care of yourself. Take care of us.
Our thanks to Emily Blacher. The weather, cloudy across the entire UK. Sunny spells are possible most anywhere.
And our thanks to Paddy O'Connell, to Libby Purvis, and to all of you who got in touch. Goodbye. This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. We start this week with a question. Is Jeremy Hardy a closet Tory?
The point about Osborne and Cameron is they're a horrible kind of posh, braying hoorays, having a tremendous lark, playing at running a country. And if anything gets in their way, it's as though it's the first day of the grouse season and one of the beaters has been shot and his widow's kicking up a bit of a bloody stink about it.
This is James. I think anyone would be hard-pushed to call the 30 minutes of incessant Tory coalition-bashing comedy. Just broadcasting such a left-wing biased show in prime-time comedy slot is, I'm afraid, fuel to all those who accuse the BBC of such bias.
In feedback this week, listeners asked, and Deborah Wilson was hooked.
I thought the programme was brilliant. How long must it take him to write such clever stuff, peppered with such golden nuggets of wit? I loved it.
I suppose it's like plantation owners going out onto the veranda to listen to the slaves sing.
These lefties sure have rhythm. Weller! Weller! Come here, pour me my mint julep.
But many of you felt that while Jeremy might have thought he was speaking to the nation, he was really only speaking to Labour voters.
Hello, this is Ian Payne from Maidenhead. This programme appeared to be a diatribe of Jeremy Hardy's prejudiced extreme left-wing views. It wasn't clever and it certainly wasn't funny.
Conservatives love a row with Brussels because upsetting foreigners is second only to killing them and stimulating the pleasure centres of the Conservative Party.
The BBC is a not...
It's 20 to 3 and we've just finished for the night. The whole day has been quite a baptism of fire.
Plus, can you identify this sound? It helps to be a Northumbrian. The answer coming up shortly. By the way, if you notice that my interviewing technique has changed, this is the reason. Earlier this week, Radio 1 reporter Chris Stark of the Scott Mills Show interviewed the Hollywood star Mila Kunis. He declared at the start that he was terrified, asked all the wrong questions in the wrong order, and in doing so created an internet sensation. And an interview which Mila Kunis herself declared, perhaps tongue-in-cheek, to be one of the best she's ever done.
Am I doing all right so far?
You're doing fantastic.
Okay.
How you feeling? How you feel you're doing?
I'm a little less nervous than when I walked in.
Right? It's not that bad. It's not that scary.
I don't know.
Really? What about this is frightening to you? Tell me.
Well, I'm talking right at you now. There's cameras everywhere. There's a lot of people.
Ms. Kunis also agreed to go to a football match with him, and it's not even a Premier League game.
Yeah, we go see a Watford match. And it's a nice day out. We could go for a Nando's before. Do you have Nando's?
What are Nando's?
It's like a chicken restaurant.
Gosh, you're teaching me so much.
I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here at all. And
this is the best interview I've had today. I'm begging you. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
right, here's how I see the day panning out.
I think I'll try that interview technique with the next film star I get to meet. Julie Christie, perhaps, or better still, Helen Mirren. They'd just laugh, I guess, which is what many listeners do when Jeremy Hardy is on the wireless.
Jeremy Hardy speaks to the nation.
First-time lisk why most BBC comedy seems to be left-wing. Is Boris Johnson the only right-winger who can tell a joke? Or is it just that he is one? Sorry, that's just my socialist side showing. BBC presenters are, of course, supposed to be neutral, but sometimes we let down our guard and our personality shines through. I've never done it myself, of course, but Paddy O'Connell has.
My name's Lynn Smith, and my main concern was that he wasn't going to get into trouble. I had feelings of thinking, gosh, I hope he doesn't get hauled over the coals and told to be a bit more professional, because I felt it was just so human.
And remember all the BBC talk earlier this year about getting more female experts onto the airwaves? Has anything changed? In honour of International Women's Day this week, we follow academic researcher Sally Marlowe as she makes her first news feature for the Today programme.